everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Hi-Fi Preschool and Kids Weekly Training Podcast. My name is Crystal Mizuka. I'm part of the Hi-Fi team, and I am here with the one, the only, the spectacular and bald Jeremy Carroll.
What a setup. Wow.
Listen, it's fine. You got your Chrome Dome and it worked for you. Anyways, we are excited because this is kind of a special episode because this is just for kids. This week, we actually have two separate Bible stories for preschool and kids, even though both of them are talking about how God helps us and cares about our actions. However, the stories are going to be different. So if you are a preschool leader, you are more than welcome to listen and enjoy, because let's be honest, Jeremy and I are pretty fun. But
pretty good.
we do have a specific preschool podcast for this week as well. So this one will just be talking about the kids' Bible story. So just be ready for that. But it is super fun to be here today as we are rounding out the month of April. Our Bible story today is called Humble Actions, and it is from Philippians 2, 1 through 18. And this is going to be a very interesting, kind of different Bible story for us because we don't always do a ton of epistles. But Philippians is going to be a great one for kids. And so before we get into the Bible story, Jeremy, let's answer a fun icebreaker question. You know that we love to do this because it gives our listeners an opportunity to kind of get to know us, put a little personality behind the names and the voices and the people who are creating Hi-Fi. But also, it's a great, fun question that you can ask leaders, you could ask adults during drop off and pickup, and it's just a great way to have conversation and get to know each other. So, Jeremy, here's the question.
Ready.
Who in your family are you the most like, and why do you think that is?
I'm not sure how to answer most like. I will say that I am told I look most like my grandfather. And I know we're not talking about look like, but that's where I'm starting, and we'll get there.
That's fine.
And he was a great role model in terms of his actions. He was just very humble. He was very quiet and thoughtful about things. And so he is somebody that I have tried to emulate in life. He passed a little more than a decade ago now, but I tend to say, oh, I want to be most like him. There are some aspects, I don't think he'll ever listen to this, but there are some aspects that maybe I'm not so proud about, because in some ways I have found myself a lot like my dad, particularly in my younger life, where my dad, how he acted in his younger life, and we even kind of joke about it in a somewhat serious way, is that there's the Carol anger, where my dad was just like, he carried stuff, and like he would just sometimes not come off as a very kind man, and like I never doubted he loved me and those kinds of things, but it's just this almost explosive anger sometimes. And I know in my young parenthood life as a dad, I struggled with that, of just being more harsh than I should be. And so I don't like that. So I think there's some elements in which, to kind of steer us into this actions, there are some elements in which I still strive to be wise and thoughtful and meticulous like my grandfather, my mom's dad, but I also know that I still have a lot of tendencies from my own dad who maybe it can be a little bit hard sometimes. And so, I don't know. That's kind of where I would land. A little grandfather, a little dad, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is going to be a big part of what we talk about, and how we are often influenced by the people that we spend time with.
Yeah.
Our actions can end up reflecting theirs. Mine is, I'm 45, and I am so much like my mom. It's embarrassing. And oftentimes I hate it. Growing up, I sound exactly like my mom. People would think we're the same person on the phone because, we had landlines, everybody. And so you would answer the phone, even if the phone call wasn't for you. And they would always think I was my mom. I look just like her, even though she's only 5 feet tall. I've always just been a taller version of her, but I always felt like I was so different from her and I'd never be like her. And now I just say and do so many things. And I'm like, that is my mother. Like she has influenced me so much. And even my kids will look at me and be like, you sound like Go Go. And I'm like, don't say that to me. But what's funny, and I know this wasn't quite the question, my 14-year-old son, I'm a single mom. My 14-year-old son, Noah, he's the only one at home now. And we are so much alike. And I think that he would say that he's a lot like me. And a lot of that does have to do with actions. We just like a lot of the same things. We talk all the time. We call each other twin just because we're so similar. And so
Mm,
I just think it's funny, but it's amazing how much other people's actions can influence and inspire kind of who we are and our own actions as well.
hmm.
And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this week as we look at Philippians 2 1 through 18. God genuinely cares about how we live and act. And that is going to be a great thing for kids to learn. God doesn't call us to live set apart just because. It's because he genuinely cares about who we are and how we're living. And so in Philippians, Paul said that they should live with humble actions, but he didn't just leave it there. He essentially said, live with humble actions like Jesus did,
Yeah.
kind of as our example. And so, what would you say, Jeremy, is the difference between teaching kids to have, like, in quotes, good actions or right actions and teaching kids to follow the example of Jesus?
So sometimes I won't say sometimes in high five, we know that every session stands alone, and that's true. And we want this session to stand alone. You don't have to have had the previous sessions to talk about this one. Um, but one of the reasons we ordered the sessions the way we did is because there was a session earlier in the month, session 2, that was talking about thoughts. And the thing about the difference between good actions and what I would say maybe even holy actions or following the example of Jesus is really the motivation. It's the thoughts behind that.
Mm,
Because you can
mhm.
have two people doing the same thing. And if one has a different internal motivation, one may be pleasing to God in faith and one may not be, maybe just
Yeah.
being doing something because they think it's good. And so there's a sense in which we do need to think somewhat introspectively about the actions. And really, I think that's when we think about Philippians 2. I think Paul is kind of writing and riding on both of those proverbial train rails there, because he's
Hmm.
saying, um, think about this and think in this way. He says, have this attitude in yourself. He's saying there's an
Yeah.
internal component to how you live out your life. And so when Paul says that, he says, adopt this attitude in you.
Mm,
Again, he's introducing, or he's building really on this idea of think of others as more important than yourself, which he said a few verses earlier. And so, um, so, so when it comes to wrestling a little bit with whether an action is good or holy or spirit filled or whatever, however we want to define that, really comes down to motivation. Now, with kids, particularly younger kids, that's going to be that's going to be a little bit of a harder um, conversation to steer,
hmm.
which is also part of why we didn't tackle this with preschoolers, because um, uh, one of the things that I have said a few times in these podcasts is every action starts with a thought, and so we have to give that ability to think and think about those motivations. Older kids, preteens, they're probably going to be able to start to grasp a hold of that particular idea very well. Younger kids are going to still be in that developmental spot where they're like, okay, I just did this because I wanted to, or
Hmm.
I did it because I was told to, or it was the right thing to do, but they don't really know why it was the right thing to do. And so what Paul's doing here in this passage is he really is setting up Jesus as this ultimate example. And when it says that everyone should, like when he starts in some of the early verses of Philippians 2, where he says, don't look out to your own interest, but also to the interests of others. He's saying part of the first step of this is really get your minds off of your number one,
Mm-hmm.
and get your minds on how do I treat people, and how when I act and I behave, and how do my actions influence other, and how do my actions impact others. And so he even Paul is starting with this internal thought process of behavior matters, also where it
Yeah.
comes from matters. And
Mm-hmm.
again, he says, adopt this attitude in Jesus. And he says Jesus emptied himself. He didn't consider himself with this idea of equal with God. And I love the way our Bible story uses this language, because it says, um, he set aside, Jesus set aside his own life by taking on the attitude and actions of a servant in human form. I love that language
Mm,
because it really sets a different um, a different set of parameters for our kids
mm-hmm.
to start to think about. We don't do things because our parents tell them they're good. We don't do things just because our pastor tells us they're good. We don't do things just because um, the world tells us they're good.
Right.
Really, what we the example here, the focal point needs to be on, what does Jesus say is good? How did
Yeah.
Jesus act? And we had that old thing from the 90s has kind of made a little bit of a resurgence. What would Jesus do? um,
Mm,
to help get us to challenge what how would Jesus act? That's sort of the thought process in that old WWJD, was how would Jesus act. But we also have to balance that a little bit with, what did Jesus think about this first, and then how did that
yeah.
motivate him to act. And
Yeah.
so Paul's doing a lot of that. There's a lot of density to this passage that, I mean, we could span this passage weeks and weeks, and we won't do that. But um, anyway, I think that's part of it. Is there we have to be willing to start steering kids into a place to consider, number one, that our actions are result of what's inside us, where our thoughts, our heart state, and that's what we want to direct first to Jesus, and we and set our minds on Jesus. And
Mm-hmm.
then as we do that, the clarity of how he acted and how he would act is improved and increased. It becomes more clear how he would act and how he would do, and that helps us know how to behave, and gets us to
Yeah.
those actions.
I think that's great. And it's amazing because people will always say, well, we don't know how Jesus would respond in this situation because we didn't have like they didn't have technology. They didn't have social media in Jesus's time. They didn't
Yeah.
have this and that. And
Hmm.
while that may be true, there is still so much that we can learn from Jesus himself and how he
Yeah.
acted and interacted with people. And kids often follow the example of others around them. I say kids,
Hmm.
but adults are the same way, right? Like,
For sure.
and
Yeah.
Jeremy, we were recording the week 2 podcast, which was about thoughts, and you had mentioned about how loud the world is that kids are
Mm.
growing up in. They are inundated with so much more influence strictly because of technology. Um, if I wanted to, I could stop this recording and I could go listen to a sermon from a pastor in India. That wouldn't have happened when
Yeah.
we were kids. You would have
Mm-mm.
had to
No.
order a tape, and when our parents were kids, it would have even been thought of, right? And
Right.
so they are inundated with people all the time, and we can help kids recognize that we are influenced by the people that we spend time with. Now, I never want to come down too hard on technology because while there is a lot of like bad stuff and influence out there, there's still
Hmm.
a lot of good stuff too. There are so many people that kids can learn from who are kind and caring and compassionate and making a difference in the world. And this is a great opportunity for us to say, when you see those godly actions, 100%, like do the same, be the same, act the
Hmm.
same. But ultimately what it comes down to is we have the perfect example of how to live in Jesus. If we want to know what pleases God, we can look to the example of Jesus. If we want
Yes.
to know how we're supposed to live, we can look to the example of Jesus. And this is a great week. And again, this isn't anything that we necessarily wrote in there, but leaders, I would say this is a great time to encourage kids, like spend time in the Bible, specifically spend time reading stories about Jesus, because the more time you spend with him and you learn from him, you start to act like him. You believe what he believed and you behave the way that he behaved because he is becoming the ultimate example of how you want to live. Like when it comes down to it, when I think about the work that I do, I'm not trying to like stroke your ego because you're my boss, but I do ask myself sometimes, what would Jeremy do here? What would Jeremy think? How would Jeremy plan? Because I so trust and admire who you are as a leader at Lifeway. But ultimately, my last question is always, what is going to please God? What would Jesus
Mm,
do if he was writing this Bible story or planning this
yeah.
game? And so helping kids recognize, like, yeah, we are really influenced and inspired, sometimes not in a good way, by the people around us. And so, yeah, we should be around people who are going to like influence us and influence our actions in a good way. But ultimately, Jesus is the number one example of how to live our lives. So if we're ever questioning, wondering, worrying, like you said, Jeremy, we can stop and ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? How would he act and behave in this situation?
Yeah.
Okay, before we wrap things up, I thought that this is a really fun one to first off, I'm sorry. I should have asked you, did you have anything to add to that? To my
Nope.
boss that I'm recording a podcast with when it comes to being influenced by the actions of others, and Jesus is our ultimate example.
No.
Okay. Hopefully that won't go on my performance review. Crystal
No.
cut me
We're
off on
good.
the podcast. It's fine. Listeners, you're getting a really good insight into the banter between Jeremy and I as boss and employee. This is always how we interact. But
Mhm.
but actually that it transitions well into this last question. So um it can be really inspiring to learn about other people and their own walks with Jesus. And so I just want to ask you, Jeremy, like what has helped you grow in following and living like Jesus?
One of the reasons I am so passionate about hi-fi and the flip the script study that we've done and the, the the truths we've gleaned from that and what we've implemented in hi-fi. Um, and so I was at a conference recently, and I was teaching this conference on the power of belonging, and that's part of the DNA of hi-fi. And I think the reason why I am so passionate about that is um, I don't know. I can't look back on my life and say, man, I was thoroughly, deeply discipled by like this one guy. And I
Mm,
wish that I had that. Some people have
hmm.
that. Um, and I try to be that for other people. There are people in
Yeah.
my life where I've tried to say I'm going to walk. There's a couple that come to mind. I want to walk with this person um, and, uh, and just be there, a constant presence for that person in a discipleship way. And the reason why I say that is because we know, and leaders, you probably know this, discipleship, real, true discipleship, best happens in the context of relationships.
Yep.
And that's why the belonging element of hi-fi is so important. It's not we just want kids to have fun and we just want kids to move from outsiders to insiders. Like that's true, but the reason we lift up belonging so much in hi-fi is because we know that relationships matter.
Mm,
Relationships are so important to influencing who we are and how we behave and how we think and all of those things. In
yeah.
fact, I was thinking of another example when you were talking about you and your mom. I was thinking a couple of days ago, my middle daughter and my oldest daughter, they were on the phone. My oldest daughter's out of the house, she's married and has a kid, and they were kind of going through a car crisis. Anyway, my young middle daughter and my older daughter were on the phone talking, actually on the phone, not just texting. They were talking
That's
on the phone,
awesome.
voice to voice. And and my older daughter said something, and my middle daughter said, "You have never sounded so much like mom." And it just made me think of like even our kids see that how they are influenced and behave by that.
Hmm.
And so that just it made me think of when you were talking. That made me think like even our kids see that, and that's true. So
Yeah.
so the question you asked me is what has helped me grow. Well, while I don't have one guy that's been a course in my life, there have been a period of different people in my life, men and women, who have positively impacted the spiritual journey that have been on and that I'm still on today. There's a couple of buddies of mine who I'm going to have lunch with tomorrow that one I've known since I was in high school, and one I've just known for the past 5 or 6 years, 7, 8 years now. And we play ultimate frisbee together, and we do all kinds of things. But we're gonna have lunch tomorrow, and we just do that to keep connected and encourage one another. And so the people in my life, this is a long way to say, the people in my life, the relationships I have had, that is a key part of what has helped me grow in following Jesus and seeing models, good and bad, but seeing models of people who are pursuing a relationship with Jesus, who love Jesus and want to live their lives in a way that honor him. That has definitely been a part of my story. The other real big part of my story, which shouldn't be any surprise given the kind of work that I do and the ministry life that I have been in, is, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to immediately give a challenge, is be in the Word. Like Crystal, you said this a second ago, like read the Bible, like read the stories of Jesus. And leaders, if you made it this far in the podcast, I want to give you this challenge. Don't assume you know this passage. This is one of those familiar passages that, in fact, I've quoted a few pieces of it from a few different translations over the course of the podcast, because it's one that I'm super familiar with, and a few different English translations I'm familiar with. But even before we started recording, I pulled the passage up on my phone. I had our Bible story, but I also put it up on my phone because I wanted to see it with my own eyes in the scriptures. And so if you're driving, if you're commuting, like open up a Bible app and listen to this passage, or stop and read this chapter 2 of Philippians, and just pray, Lord, speak to my heart first in this. And as you're preparing, do that, because we know the word of God is living and active and is sharper than any double-edged sword, and it's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. Yes, those are two different verses, but I put them together because they're important about the power that God uses the scriptures in our lives. And so relationships and the power of scripture in our lives through the power of the Holy Spirit. Those are the things that I have anchored on a lot of my spiritual journey. Obviously, Jesus is my anchor, but he has used those two tools in my life to help grow me in living like Jesus.
Yeah, that is so good. And what a great final reminder for leaders. Like, that's what we want kids to know. God cares about our actions, but the way that those actions are transformed is by following the example of Jesus, but also learning from the incredible examples and lives of people around us. So thank you so much for joining us. You'll definitely want to tune in next week. I mean, you want to tune in every week, but next week we're going to get to start the month of May, and we are going to have a really fun. Well, first off, I know this is for kids, but I will say the preschool theme is very fun. It is Here and Now. God wants me to tell people about Jesus. And for kids, it's going to be I Am Here to Share Jesus, with the theme Nonstop. We can't stop. We won't stop telling people about Jesus. So excited. So until then, listeners, have a great time building real connection and true belonging as you lead High Five.